Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Pauline with Tragedy and Beauty. Today I was going to talk about a patient that we had that arrived to us around 3 o'clock in the morning one day. And it was pretty quiet when I first went into work. I got my report, everything was going great. And of course, I let the guys know, everybody know that there was something coming in by and it was so high up towards the ceiling. I said, I'm thinking a chopper, maybe. And they're like, what? And I was like, no, it's coming in, but I don't know where it's from. But I said, I expect we're going to have a really busy night. So anyway, everybody quickly got their work done. And by this time, months had gone by, or a couple of years, and they're actually listening to what I'm saying because it always happens. And of course, I give the soul or whoever was hanging around me all the time the grace of God to let me know. Thank you. So, anyway, we prepared for whatever was going to happen. And the rest of the unit was really pretty good. We only had a few left on life support. And then we had one young fella who was probably in his early 40s. And he was having, he already had his orthopedic surgery and he was waiting on a bed. Now, if you know anything about hospitals, they're filled to the rafter with people who are now waiting for replacement to a nursing home or facility. So it kind of ties up the active beds for everybody. So he didn't get one that day, and I was hoping he was going to get one the next day. Lovely gentleman. So anyway, I continued on with my care of my other patients, and I had a couple actually. And he wasn't one of them. He was somebody else's patient. So mine were more cardiac wise, and it was rhythm checks most of the time and blood work. So I decided that I would just keep up with my stuff and help out whoever got a patient, which is what we often did in the intensive care. You know, if you weren't busy, you would help the next guy. So everything was prepared, the room was prepared, the IV ports were all ready, and the operating room called and said, we will be over very shortly with your patient. She's not really doing great, but we're going to bring her over here as soon as we finish stabilizing her. And that was like 1:30 in the morning or so. And I thought, oh, okay, no problem. So, being one of the seniors, I decided, I'll make sure all my stuff's done and then I can help whoever was supposed to pick up this patient. So we got everything prepared and we waited and we waited. And then finally the call came about 10 to 3. We're on our way through. Make sure respiratory's there, everybody's there because, we're going to have to put her on life support for a while. So her problem was massive internal bleeding. And so it was a long surgery and quite unexpected. She was in a major MVA. She was airlifted from one area of the province to the next to us. So we were well prepared for her. So we all went to the bedside and we waited till she came in and everybody did their thing. And she was holding her own until she came through the door. And then all of a sudden, her heart gave out again. So we go to start CPR again, and we're getting drugs, and the doctors are yelling out, give this, give that. And although it seems like a really long time, it's not really that long of a time. However, we're still doing compressions and we're adding more drugs and we're getting more IVs prepared. And we're going through a lot of things that we would normally usually not have to unless we are fully resuscitating, like an open heart patient or something. So the room, you can imagine the small intensive care rooms aren't that big. They're just big enough to hold a code team, not even like more than 3 family members. So we all crammed in there with all of our machinery and stuff. And I got to the head of the bed. So I got the pleasure of bagging this woman with the anti-bag and helping her breathe. And this went on for probably 7 or 8 minutes when I had a team member come by and say, can you tell Pauline I need her out here? And I was like, what? And I looked briefly at the door and I went, I'm sort of busy here. And I just looked at the doctor like, what's that about? But anyway, we continued on, working on her. And it went on again. The woman, the nurse had left, ran down the hall, and she came back again. And she goes, Pauline, I need you now. And I said, is somebody crashing? She said, no, I need you. And I'm like, okay, can that wait for like 10 minutes until we can change places? And she said, no, I need you now. So anyway, the next person up to assist with the ambu bag and her ventilation was finally the respiratory tech who came by. So I asked him if he wouldn't mind taking over, and I crawled out whatever space between people I could to see what her problem was. So she grabbed me by the arm and pulled me into room 5, and she goes, "You've got to come with me. You got to come with me right now." And she goes, "The man's freaking out." And I was like, "What's he freaking out about?" And she said, he saw something. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, the man that was supposed to go for the floor because he was stabilized began freaking out because there was something that came into his room. So I put the lights up higher than what they were. And I asked him, what do you think came into your room, honey? And he goes, it was that man. And he goes, he was all dressed in black. And I looked around and I was like, did anybody see anybody in black? They're like, no. I went, um, I don't know who that would be because I said there's only us and the RT wears green. And I said, so how did you see him? Well, he sat right beside me, right there. And I thought, oh, he couldn't possibly, but he could have. So then I said, just a second. And I quieted myself down between the code and him. And I thought about it for a second and went, what if this person in black was coming for her? What if he got the wrong, or it got the wrong room, this soul? So I said, why do you think he was coming for you? And he said, well, back in the day of the war, and remind you, he was in his 40s. He had been part of World War One or World War II, sorry, and he had fought a couple places, was injured, and so he was released. His best friend was shot and tragically was dying beside him in the trench. He tried everything he could to help the best friend, but unfortunately, the best friend had passed away. He never forgot his friend, which I'm sure I wouldn't either, with all that going on, but somehow he correlated the black person in all black robed and hat into the best friend that had passed away. So I said, I don't think your best friend that you loved would come like that. I really don't. But I said, what else did you see? He said, well, there's so many people going back and forth and back and forth to this place. And he goes, I don't know why they were running in somewhere else. I don't know if they were going to get him. And then all of a sudden he kind of left airspace with me and thought that the soldier was in another room where we were all running. So I said, just a minute, can I explain this to you? So I explained it and I said, that what you were seeing is correct. You saw the nurses all at the drug counter preparing medications for a patient that just came out of the operating room and wasn't doing very well, and we had to help her. And the fact of the matter was is she wasn't doing very well at all. And I said, I think whoever the spirit was got the rooms mixed up. I said, I really do. And he just kind of looked at me and he goes, are you sure? And I said, oh, honey, I think I'm more than sure on this one. And I said, I don't think anybody would want to harm you. I said, you didn't do anything to anybody, did you? And he said, no. He said, I would never. Of course, I guess shooting the bad guy kind of counts, but he was more into his best friend. And I said, your best friend would not come that way. But I said, I'm going to leave the lights on and you put your bell on, tear it out of the wall, or pull it out of the wall, I should say, and let us know if you see anything else. If you feel anything, you let me know. I said, I'll come right in. So the rest of the night had passed with the lights on very low overhead, and he settled back to sleep. In the morning, I went in to see him and I asked him, I said, has anybody reappeared? Did anybody come? He said, no. He said, I really actually kind of slept pretty good. Can I get my bed in the floor today? I said, well, I'm hoping that's going to happen. We're going to see if we can make that happen for you. Um, but the fact that he didn't see anything again, and I said to him, I think I was right. I said, the lady did not make it. She passed away through the night because she was so sick. And I said, I think that was a mix up between you thinking of the war and, him coming for his loved one or whatever. And so I said, I don't think you'll see him again. Luckily, he appreciated everything I had to offer, but I did feel bad for him because of what he had brought. The other one was a few nights after that when he had gotten a floor bed and, things had cleaned up a bit. Of course, we got more post op surgeries that weren't kind of doing well. We got more codes from the floor, more cardiac events into the unit. And we were much busier than what we were the night this gentleman was there. And funny enough, not really funny at all for us, but it kind of became a real joke with everybody going, oh yeah, the crazy's working tonight. It was always people that weren't on my team and were not aware of me at all. And I just kind of laughed at people. I was like, oh, you guys making fun of me all the time. And we just laughed. And I really, because by this time I was unbothered, untouched by anything. And in fact, I don't think there's anything worse than sitting charting and having somebody breathing down your neck during charting and you turning around and going, would you please move? It's bothering me. And male or female, whatever the spirit was, sometimes it would come and blow down my neck. And it's like, hurry up, hurry up. And I'm like, mother, like, would you leave me alone? And I would just giggle. And everybody looked like, never mind, they're not even going there. So I thought, doesn't bother them, not going to bother me. I said, eventually I kind of said my piece with them. So anyway, this one shift that we were working, everybody was busy with, cleanup time coming around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. You tidy up your bedside, you start emptying things that need to be emptied and get your work done for the oncoming shift at 7. And it's usually quite a quick process. You know what you're going to be doing. But unfortunately, this shift was not the same. We carry narcotic keys with us. One of us must have them on them all the time. I did have the narcotic keys with me, and there was 2 of us that were going to be doing drug count to make sure all narcotics were counted. If it wasn't, you stayed behind, everyone, and you dug through your pockets, you dug through the garbage, you dug everywhere to ensure that people got the right amount, that nobody's walking out with anything, because all drugs have to be accounted for. That is the government rule. If they're not, you wait. So as we became closer to the time, I thought, here we go. So I put the keys out of my pocket. I put them on the top of the computer. It's a large slab of computers that everybody gets to read all the time when you're going by. They're at the bedside. They ding, they bang, whatever. So I left the keys on top of the computer. And when I came back for them, somebody said, oh, did the keys go anywhere? Because I need to get one more drug out of the cover. And I said, no, I left them right on top. And I said, go ask everybody like who borrowed them and get them from them. Well, the girl went around, asked all the people, all the nurses said, no, 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 nobody had them. Well, at 7:05, now we have to start the dig and search. Everybody emptied their linen, went through every speck of linen that was in that bag, and gloved, of course, and jingled and jangled and, whipped it around, and there was no keys in anybody's hamper. Next, we moved it into the garbages. And they were all over the floor, unfortunately, on linen, and to keep them up off the floor, presented and put them back in the garbage when we were done. No keys in that garbage can, anybody's garbage can, for 12 beds, plus the office space, plus the rooms, nothing. There was nothing that we could find. We very quickly did, because each one had a bed, so with it taking time to go through stuff. And finally, I was getting pretty ugly at whoever took the keys. So as everybody was just finishing and day shift was there waiting to come in, I said, "You'll have to wait just a minute." And I explained to the charge nurse what had happened. So she had the girls and herself, so they all went back into the little office space and waited in there while we presumed getting into our stuff. So finally, I went to the counter and I banged my hand on the counter, just bang, and everybody stopped. And I said, "I don't know where the keys are, but you better get them back here some quick, because I'm mad." So whatever was out there, I poured it in, like, "I'm angry. You took them." All of a sudden, one of the 12 nurses just turns around in a trance, walks off to her bedside, puts her hand in the trash, jingle, jingle, here she comes, back with the keys, and walks them over to me and says, "Here." I know she checked her bag. I know. I watched her. I was beside her. So she never had them to start with. And she's as faithful as the day is long. But we all saw her. So she doesn't remember, probably to this day, she does not remember having to go back into her garbage and bring the keys out of the garbage. So there's a trick and a half for you. So they are there. They will try to misplace things on you. Some of them are, I don't want to say devious, but they do like to joke. They can pull a pretty good joke, like, breathing down your neck, or taking your pen, putting it from one place in the room to the other, little things like that, or whatever little thing they can get into. Sometimes they will. And to them, that's just part of the spirit world, I guess, just to keep you guessing. But this day, it was just beyond the teasing part. It was, disrupting our work plan. I have no idea why they did it, because it took a lot longer than we expected. But by 8 o'clock, we were finally getting out of there. So if you liked my little speech today and all my little stories, you can hit the like button and share. Also, remember to subscribe to my channel. It sure helps. Thank you and have a good day.